All right, well, I'm going to start the recording because it's 3, but for some reason, Nick, you don't see other people, right?
Let me see.
I see about
I
6
see
of us.
9. I see
Oh,
9
isn't that
people.
funny? Something's off with my, I can't see all of you, and I even tried. Okay, well, I'm going to start. Great, let's begin. But that's very odd. You're going to have to just say, oh, there. Oh, it's on a funny thing. I can only see 2 of you at once. But I see you. Okay, well, let's start. Great, great, great. Okay, before we launch into budgets, I want to say that I was to be gone for the next 2 weeks, as I said last week. And unfortunately, my poor husband had a bad fall on the ice and cannot go biking in Chile anytime soon. So we've had to cancel that trip.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, and he's not, he's not broken anything, but we can't go on a big plane and go biking. So I will be here next Tuesday. Please, so I would rather than taking 2 weeks off, I would rather finish next Tuesday if everyone's able to. Since I didn't say that was happening, if there are people who have other plans, then instead we'll wait and we'll finish on the 7th or whatever. I think that's the day it was. So put in the chat box or just speak up right now if you cannot make it next Tuesday. Otherwise, we will finish next Tuesday. Everybody good with that so far? So I think that would be great. And it was only because I was going to be gone. So, okay, so that's great. All right, we are going to launch right into budgets, which is kind of a big deal and scares a lot of people. And I want to tell you, I am not a math person, but I really understand how budgets work in grants, and I can help you do that the same, do it too. So let's go right into it. These are typical budget categories. Clearly, as with anything else, it's up to the funders, how they ask you to report budget, just as everything else. But this is a pretty normal kind of budget that you would see, and I intentionally put one in that has quite a few categories. Some don't have as many categories, but these are the kind of things that you would typically have to fill in. And of course, naturally, we're going to have a little time at where you'll work in your groups, and that's why I sent you that budget sheet, so you can actually practice filling these in. So let's break it down and talk about what's involved in each of these. Oh, wait, before we do that, let me just step back a minute and say, here is a problem that a lot of newer grant writers have, from what I've seen, is they work on the grant, work on the narrative, get everything, figure out the program, figure out how many staff they want, have it all set, and then they turn to the budget. That is a really big mistake. The budget really needs to be developed hand in hand with your program, especially if it's a budget that has multiple parts and multiple people. Some of yours are much simpler, and that's not going to be hard at all. But if you're talking about an $80, $90, $100,000 budget, and there's 5, 6 staff, and there are other things that there's travel, and there's insurance, and there's equipment and supplies, you are going to be in for an all-nighter at least, and you may not do a very good job on your budget. So please don't do that. As you're developing what it is you're going to do, it's really important to look and start to think about if we're, and I'm just going to give you, just kind of how I do it. I'm going to use for an example the program that I did for adult daycare for adults, mostly older adults with Alzheimer's and dementia. And when we started out that program, I think it was going to be $120,000. And we just thought we had so much money that we could spend. And so I think we started out with something like 5 staff. And then we realized that other things are going to take a lot of money and that we kind of forgotten how much the benefits are and the overhead and all that. And so as we were building the program, it was really important to understand that no, we couldn't afford a full-time activities director. That person had to be half-time. And that instead of 3, I think, or 2 full-time nurses or 3, we had to cut back on that. And that we were going to ramp up another staffer. So she would start when we didn't have very many people and then build up. So that was very, very helpful to know as we were writing the narrative. And it made, that helped us make sure that when we wrote the narrative, we weren't then having to go back and rewrite it and rethink how things were going to work. So you should be working on your budget and looking at your budget and thinking about how is this going to play out in the budget, especially with personnel. So without further ado, let's talk about these different areas. And again, I'm happy to have any questions. Oh, let me look at the chat and see if there's people who couldn't come. Okay, looks like everybody can come. So I will send out an email to all of you just confirming that we're going to do next Tuesday, which will be just great. Oops, and I went too far ahead. All right. Personnel. All right. Clearly, of course, that salaries or wages. And excludes when it says exclude those that are included in general operating administration costs. Let me explain what I mean here. When I did that adult daycare project, it was under the auspices of Rutland Mental Health. And that meant that we had some admin costs that were going to be, that Rutland Mental Health was going to be covering. And so a very small amount of, for example, the bookkeeper's time, the janitorial services time, even the director was ultimately responsible. I mean, maybe he would spend just a couple hours on this, but he had to know about it. So in that case, the wages for those people are included under overhead. Now, if, let's say, Rutland Mental Health was starting a whole new division, and it was going to take 20% of the director's time to start this whole new division, and this whole new division was going to take up, 1/3 of the space. So that meant that there was going to, the housekeeping and the janitorial it was going to be a major expense. In that case, you would put that under personnel. But if it's only going to be a few hours, then it really goes under overhead. You figure each employee's wages based on the hourly or annual rate. And what I always do is I put it in terms of FTE, which is the full-time equivalent. So if it's a half-time activities director, it's a 0.5 FTE. I also prorate. Most people don't do this. If you're getting a grant for 12 months, let's talk about the Bennington program. You're getting a grant for 12 months. It might be month 2 before you hire any staff and pay them. It might be month 3 before the program's fully staffed. So I prorate based on when that employee begins getting paid. And I've noticed that not everybody does that. And that's a waste because, well, for one thing, it doesn't make you look very good because it makes you look like you haven't thought this through, because as a reviewer, I would say, why are they paying these 3 staff the minute the grant starts when they have a whole 2 months of startup costs? And, they're not even hiring till the middle of month 2. And also it means that you don't have it makes your budget skewed. So that personnel is usually the largest cost. And if you start your budget paying those people before you even have them, then you're going to have less to do other things. And if it's a more than 1 year grant, which most of these aren't, but I've done 3 and 5 year grants, you definitely want to estimate cost of living increases and include those. Benefits, don't forget benefits. Most grants will ask for that, but make sure those are a really big part of the budget. And it's amazing how so many times I've been working with folks on a grant and they say, well, we're going to have 5 staff and their average pay is, 40,000. So it's going to be $200,000 for personnel. And then, we start looking at the budget and they say, oh yeah, benefits, which can be anywhere from, at a very low of maybe 20 to 23% up to a third. A third is not uncommon. So that is a big chunk of your budget. And don't forget about that. And that's when we often have to start scaling back and saying, oh, we really can't have this person full-time. We're going to have them half-time. And then consultants and contractors are not staff. They are personnel related expenses, but it's very important. They are not staff. They're not paid the same way. They don't get benefits. Their pay may be completely different. They may be hourly. You may put, it may be just, we're contracting with this person for, 40 hours for the whole grant, and you just put that amount. But it's really important to think about what consultants and contractors you might have. Some of your projects are going to have contractors and some of them aren't, probably. Okay. Any questions about personnel at this point? Okay. Admin and facility related expenses. These are often listed separately, but sometimes together. But I'm just handling them all together. But it's, it may be that you do admin cost and then there's also facility related costs. So admin is the fiscal and administrative overhead. And that's what I was talking about when, even if you have a program that is standalone, there's still admin costs. And often if you have a program that's part of a bigger program, for example, colleges, university programs, they often charge, 35% overhead, which is outrageous to me, but they get away with it. And that's just the way they do it. Many grants that I've seen, well, not many, but some grants I've seen actually limit the amount of overhead you can charge to something like, it might be as low as 10% or as 10 to 12%. And I'd say, to me, I wouldn't go over 15% unless I'm in a university, and that's kind of expected, because you really do want to show that almost all of your costs are going to program. And clearly, if you have a simple program, a project like the one where you're installing a lift chair in the town hall, that is not going to have a lot of administrative overhead. There'll be a little, but consider that. But that includes fiscal and administrative overhead. That is, whoever, it's the bookkeeping, it's the taxes, it's the big boss, it's if there's an audit, it's just sometimes administrative and overhead includes things like housekeeping and janitorial. So there should be some, and I'm telling you, if you don't put administrative overhead in at all, and you are a program where there is a bookkeeper, accountant, tax preparer, a manager who's not part of the grant, then you're really doing yourself a disfavor. You're losing money because you're not paying yourself what you're actually putting into this grant. So I strongly urge you to put in some administrative overhead if you're actually going to be using some, but keep it modest. Rent or mortgage payments, and you prorate those based on when you're going to take possession of wherever it is. Don't forget utilities, which sometimes people do because they can add up, especially in Vermont in the winter, as we know right now, like today, for example. Phone service, internet, if you're paying for cell service for staff, furnishings, contracted services that relate to the facility or to, or are part of administrative overhead. So I remember in one case, we wanted to show some more match, and we convinced someone to do the snow plowing for free. And so we were able to increase our match. We'll talk about match later, but really think about every cost that you're going to have, because if you don't put it in the grant and you are paying for it for your project, then you're going to end up behind the 8 ball, especially if you end up with, 3 or 4 grants and you haven't thought about those contracted services. And this doesn't mean that you need all of these. If you're not using janitorial, if you're not using a payroll service, if if it's a small program where you're doing it yourself, you don't put these. It must reflect exactly what it is you need. Any question about this? Okay. Other expenses, and these sometimes may be listed separately, or it may just be other in a small grant, and then it's up to you to list what it is you're going to spend on. One confusing area for many people is the difference between supplies and equipment, and that's why I wrote consumables. In my mind, and I think in most people's mind, supplies are what you have to replace over and over again, and equipment is what you buy and it stays there. And that doesn't mean that it has to be big like a computer. I give you an example later, and it's for the adult daycare. And one of the things is thermometers, because that's equipment, because you're not replacing them unless they break. So think about what do you have in terms of equipment, and, think about everything that you have. I mean, chairs, tables, lamps, all that, in addition to computers and other things. And then what are the supplies you need? Dues, memberships, and subscriptions. Probably none of your grants will have that, but you never know. I'm putting everything here. This would suffice also for a much, much larger grant. With travel, you want to think about what are you paying mileage for and parking. And then for, larger grants, there often are meetings or conferences. And so you're going to pay for airfare, lodging, and meals. In some grants, it may not be a meeting or conference, but there may be staff who have to travel a ways to present or give services. And then you probably are going to pay at least for some meals and mileage. So think about that. In many grants, it doesn't come up at all. Marketing and advertising. There are a lot of ways to spend on marketing and advertising, and it would be a shame if you are starting a new program and you want to attract new people and oops, we didn't put anything in the budget for this. It also shows that you're really thinking about, how you're going to spend your money, and that you need to invest in marketing and advertising if that makes sense for your grant. So in some ways, the budget can really help boost the confidence that you know what you're doing, because you have carefully thought out really what it is we're going to need. And I just want to step back for a moment and say that's not always easy, because like if I asked you right now, what are you going to spend on marketing and advertising in Vernon, Deb, for your project? You don't know. But and same with the Bennington project. I don't know if there's going to be marketing, what kind of marketing there's going to be, but you have to do your best guesstimate, and you don't want to get caught estimating that you're spending $200, and then you realize you actually need something much more professional, and it's going to cost $2,000, which it's not for these small programs, but it's important to keep that in mind. Any kind of postage, shipping, delivery. If you're having a website and you're starting a new website, don't forget to include that. And many programs do have some kind of professional development, staff training, or TA. And special events, are you having a big party, a celebration, a fundraiser? Many nonprofits have these, and you really want to think about what's going to go into that. How much of that is, well, first, what's the budget for it? And then that's a great place where you can get match, which again, we'll talk about, which means that you're going to have people volunteering and giving things. So that shows that you have community involvement or involvement of stakeholders. So those events are a great place to do that. Okay, any questions? All right. Now, the budget narrative is a really important part of the budget, and that's where you're going to explain, and it's sometimes called budget detail. That's where you're going to explain so the funders can understand, you know, you put the amount in and now you tell them what it's for. Go ahead and read this. And then we'll talk about it for a minute. So first of all, under salaries, if it's really complicated and it's allowed, I have a whole additional sheet called personnel detail. And I will list all these people and when they're going to start. So it shows, you know, the prorated amount and how much FTE and their salary just in another sheet. If it's more than about 5 or 6 staff, I'll do that. If it's allowed, it's not always allowed. But what this does is it really, this whole detail again shows that we've thought through what is it we need. So when somebody looks at that budget, they can say, well, that's an awful lot for equipment. Why would they need so much equipment? And then we realize, oh, they don't have any laptops. They have to buy these laptops and they need, you know, medical equipment. I made this up. Somebody in the medical field would do much better than, I mean, there probably are some bigger things that I don't know about that would be equipment. And then it's important to think about what else you had, and under other, I put the food because that's a pretty important part and it's going to be a pretty major budget item. You can see supplies are those consumables. And we did have some contracted work in here. We can explain what it is. There's not room to explain it in the budget, in that budget page. So you really, to me, this is a great way to actually extend the information you have in your proposal or to sort of emphasize it, you know, what it is you're doing and remind them. And also, again, to show that you have really thought of what it takes to do this work. So when I was, like I said, the ghost grant writer, I didn't know what kind of equipment they needed. And again, I made this up because this was years ago and I don't anyway, but you know, I had to have the staff explain to me what they needed so that I could put it in there. So it was, you know, so it was real. So yes.
You have for administration and overhead, 12%. 12% of what?
That's 12% of the entire budget.
Okay.
That's what it means. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you have a dollar figure on the other sheet, and then
that's right.
You're just
yeah. So now I'm telling them
clarifying it for you. Then
exactly.
that it's going to be 12% of the budget. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, yeah, that's a very good question. So yes, administrative overhead, I want to tell them, you know, we've kept it a reasonable amount. It's 12%. And then we've explained, you know, it not only covers the fiscal and administrative oversight, but it also is building maintenance and upkeep. So otherwise it would be more like 10, you know, 9 or 10%. All right. Any other questions, comments? I hope everybody's feeling like they're kind of getting a sense of this.
Yeah, I have my hand up, Nan.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, I for some reason, like I said, I can only see 2 of you at once. So just go ahead and speak. Yes.
So you said this before, I think, but looking at admin and overhead, 12%. If you were doing this through an educational institution, you might do in kind, like a 10% in kind match or a 30%.
No, I wouldn't,
in-kind match.
not there. We're gonna talk about it in kind later. This doesn't cover, except for, I said, under rent and utilities, I said donated space, no rent. But there is other in kind here that doesn't show up on this. That's going to show up when we get to our next page, which is match. So in a university, are you saying it would be in kind, you mean because they're providing space, for example? Is that what you mean?
Correct, space or even department personnel or something.
Yeah, so that
Like
is up to,
secretary.
so that the in kind comes later. We're just telling you here that the administrative overhead is 12%. Then when we get to our actual budget sheet, which I'm going to show you, as well, we're going to talk about match, and I'll show you a budget sheet. That is where we are going to divide it up. And it may be that building maintenance and upkeep is provided by the agency, but we are going to pay our own, for some of our own fiscal and administrative oversight. Or we're going to pay for the university, for example. They want us to take that out of our grant. That is a negotiated process that you decide as you're building your program. But this just tells what the whole amount is. It doesn't mean that that's all going to be paid for by the grant. In fact, in many cases, let me give it, well, even in this case with the adult day health services expansion, we had 3 funders. One funder was the mental health center. So we showed a lot of in kind, that they were providing in kind services. Another funder was a state grant that provided for some of the staffing. Another is this grant. So when we broke out the budget, and we'll go to the budget, and I'll show you. I don't have a completed one, but I'll explain how we did that. But this just tells what the total is. It doesn't tell who's paying for it. Is that clear, everyone? This is not necessarily all coming out of the grant. In fact, it almost never is. Almost always there's some in-kind or match, otherwise known as match. Sometimes it's required and sometimes we just do it. And we're going to talk about that. Okay, any more questions? All right. The vexing question of match. I made a little pun here. Okay. There's some grants, and it's not uncommon at all. In fact, I'd like to hear from any of you who've done a grant where there is match required. Has anyone ever done a grant and had match required?
Yep. Yes.
Do you want to give an example?
So we have some USDA grants, and one we are providing match, and then we also are using match from 2 of our other grants that we have.
Yeah, and it's required. There's required match.
Yeah,
right?
some require 1-to-1 match. Some require like 16% or 17.1%.
That's interesting. So you really have to really figure out your budget carefully. Although they don't mind if you have 19 or 20% match. So what does that mean? What that means is we are happy to, have you apply for this funding. Only we really want to see that there is incredible dedication and commitment and sustainability and all that. And so we are going to require a 1-to-1 match. We will give you a $50,000 grant. All you have to do is come up with $50,000 from wherever to make that match. That is an unusually high match, 1-to-1. And it's often very hard for small organizations to do that kind of match. because basically, you'll get all this money, but you have to pay for half of it, and you have to have that guaranteed. And was that Betsy who was giving the example? No, who was sharing your example?
Me,
Yeah. Okay. Well, what you said, and this is really an important point you made, is that match doesn't always have to come out of your own budget. As I said, with this adult day services program, we were doing exactly what you said. Some of it was coming out of our budget, meaning the Rutland Mental Health, and some of it was coming from a state grant. And so we were able to apply that to this project. So, it can get kind of complicated. I mean, for really large programs, some high, like a large HUD grant, where you might be building a whole, housing project, you might have the city, the county, the state, another federal grant, an environmental services grant, there could be a mental health grant, and then, it can get very, very complicated, but we're not working with that kind of level. However, is not unlikely that you will be required to match. And I love that 17.1 or 18% match. That is great, because that is really doable for most small organizations. You can come up with that. And now we're going to talk about, how do you make that match? All right. A cash match means that you're going to that it's going to be cash outlays, which is often salaries. So let's say that there's a 20% match required, and you have 5 staff. We're going to pay for one of these staff through other than grant funds. That's 20%. That's a 20% cash match. And again, that doesn't mean that you, the organization, have to pay for that. It can be that, oh, we have this wonderful grant for children's services, and our, children's services person, the one who takes care of the kids in this program, is going to be our cash match. It can also be cash outlays. We're going to buy the computers and the furniture through cash match. You can choose what it is unless they require, but that's very unusual. Usually it just says, we want this much match. So that's one way you can do match. Another way, which we all love, is goods, services, and donated time. So we are starting a program. Let's again take this adult daycare program. And in this case, this was an expanded program. And we had a building in Brandon that part of it was actually being donated. So that took care of the whole match right there. We didn't have to worry. But let's pretend that wasn't donated. Let's pretend that we were renting that building. What else we had, which was wonderful, was we needed to furnish that building. And we were working with it was a church building, and the church was all for this. And they agreed to help and get a lot of the furniture. So how wonderful is that? We were able to provide in-kind match. The furniture, let's go back a page. We have furnishing, chairs, sofa, coffee table. You figure all that out and how much that would cost. And then you say that you're going to get that, 80% of that donated, and you got your cash match. Let's look at some other ways that people could, that you might get that match in a program like this. It may be, and this is kind of unusual for a program like this that is formal, but it may be that, oh, I know what you could do. I once was at a senior center, and I was doing an activity there anyway. they were cleaning up for the day, and somehow I got to talking, and their lunch was provided by, what's the service, that wonderful service where volunteer drivers bring lunches to seniors? What's that called?
Meals on Wheels.
Meals on Wheels. Meals on Wheels provided the lunch. And that, so when they applied for a grant for their program, they could say, and it required in kind, if it was a program that lasted over lunchtime, they could say, we have, we meet our in kind by these donated meals. And so that they're in the budget because you need to, say this is what's happening, and we're providing people lunch. So that would be a wonderful way if you could get Meals on Wheels to provide the lunch, for example. And of course, donated space is always wonderful. Other ways that you can do it are, I think I gave this as an example when I was talking earlier, but I said that the Rutland area visiting nurses and hospice program, we contracted with them to provide weekly foot care plus consultation time. And then we asked them to provide in kind. They volunteered 2 hours a month to provide a parent, not parent, a caregiver's program. So we were able to put that in as it was part of the budget, and we were able to put it in as in kind.
And I have a potentially tricky question.
Yeah.
I am working on building up a grant for an organization that I am on the board for.
Uh-huh.
And we have other people on the board and in the organization who are lawyers, and would be willing, this grant's got some legal, it's a land purchase, it's got some stuff involved. Would their time, if they volunteered it to, write up contracts, evaluate, is that, whatever their billable hours are, is that?
Look, that brings me exactly to our next item. Volunteer
okay.
time can only be counted as match if the volunteers are donating their professional time. For example, a lawyer writing up a contract as part of your program. Now, if they provide their help to, make sure that the grant is correct and all that, no. Part of the application, no, none of that would apply. But if you write into the grant that you need, X amount of hours preparing contracts, then yes, I mean, lawyers, wow, we're talking about $120, $140, $200 an hour, depending upon where
even if they're intimately involved in the organization that's applying for the grant.
Yeah, if they're, well, I think the only way they couldn't, and I don't really know the answer to this, I kind of feel like a board member already is required and expected to volunteer. So I guess it would be to me, it would be a little bit stretching it. I think I'd be uncomfortable.
But just a member of the organization, that would
a member is fine.
Okay.
Like, let's just say it's a, athletic organization and they play tennis there, and you're applying for a grant so that you can expand the facilities. It's absolutely fine for them to volunteer their time as lawyers, and that can be, that's in kind or match, because they're donating their lawyer time. That's completely out. It doesn't matter whether they benefit from the program or not. Now, look what I say here though. If they're donating their professional time, for example, a photographer taking photos, not serving as a mentor. I almost got into trouble this way because I didn't understand this when I first started. And I remember saying, well, this is, it was a program with kids. And I said, well, this is great. No problem with the match, because we're going to have like 20 volunteers, coming and leading trips and telling stories and doing all kinds of things, providing daycare, whatever it is. No, not unless they are doing this as their profession. So it is really great to show that you have volunteers. That's a wonderful thing. And I would absolutely write those into the narrative, but they're not part of the budget because they're not something that you would otherwise be paying professionals to do. You can't afford, that's just not the way the grant works. You were not planning on hiring professional babysitters at $15 an hour. The reason you can have these events and have daycare is because you're going to get volunteers from the community, which makes your grant look great. I absolutely applaud, doing that sort of thing, but it doesn't figure into the budget. So that's really important to think about. And, it doesn't matter how high powered and how well paid that lawyer is or brain surgeon. If they're serving as a mentor or taking kids on a hike, or they happen to like pottery and they're, teaching pottery, unless their profession is as a potter, that volunteer time cannot count as your match. So that's an interesting thing. Now let's look at any more questions about this, because this can be a little tricky. And it is often required, and I like to overmatch, meaning if it's required, and I wrote here, plan to include at least 20% match in the overall budget. Whether or not it's required, to me, that really shows, and this is where you can use one of my favorite sentences in all of grant writing. We are leveraging the resources. We are leveraging the funds that we're getting from this grant to create a bigger and better project, because we have a community that really cares about this. And for example, instead of instead of paying for all of our copying, one of our partners is going to let us, use their copy machine and do 500 copies a month or something like that. So you want to really think about ways that you can do this, and goods and services are a really good way to do it. So things like, and that's why in my mind, having a celebration where people are bringing food, you can count that as in kind. So and again, even if it's not required, I like to have it. And I do caution you, if there is a one-to-one match, just think about whether that, are you really up for that? If, you look and you say, wow, $50,000 grant, can you really do a $50,000 match? And again, it doesn't have to be all out of cash outlays. Now, the beautiful thing about that, as I said, about that adult daycare program is we didn't have to worry about match, because we had a building, we had a space that was worth something like, I don't know, it would have been at least a couple $1,000s a month. And so we were very, we were able to say that and of course, to the funder, talk about leveraging resources. I mean, that's fantastic. They could do this, we could do this program and we didn't have to pay rent. And that meant that we could do a bigger program and spend more of our time on serving more people and having better staff. We didn't have to spend it on space. So that was fantastic. All right, let's take a look before I put you to work. This is what I gave you. And this is what a very typical budget looks like. We're working with, well, you're not going to finish it today, but you can get started. But, did I say 20 or 25,000? Who remembers?
You said 30.
30. Okay, this is a $30,000 grant. And I'm going to put you to work, because again, this is kind of how we do it. I'm going to refresh your minds again. I put in the slides that will refresh you about the projects, but I think we're pretty familiar with them now. And this is the time when you really think about what it is you need. In most cases with this grant, you're not going to have personnel, but you are going to have contractual. for most of these grants. You are going to be paying somebody to do something. For most of them, you're maybe not going to, I don't think you're going to have travel. You don't need to do everything. Now, again, equipment doesn't mean that, it's only equipment that you are actually going to purchase for this grant. So if, for example, you have a contractor who needs to use a huge tractor to, level out that parking lot, that is not contractual. I mean, I'm sorry, that is not equipment. That's their problem. That all fits under contractual. So you can just put, how much we think we need in that contractual, and that's their problem, how they're going to break it up among their personnel and their equipment. As I said, in the budget detail, you may put like, contractual X amount of hours at X amount, at X amount an hour, so that we know, about how much you're talking about here. But that's what they charge you for their equipment, time, whatever it is that they have. Some of you will have supplies, and you need to think about what those are, both in terms of just office and administrative supplies, and then any supplies you need to actually carry out the program. Training, not so much, except for, maybe for the Bennington program. Think about marketing, and think about marketing broadly, meaning marketing how, to get people excited about our program, so they're going to help with it, to get people, understanding what the purpose is, to get people there, whatever it is. There's going to be some kind of marketing for some of these. And space and rent, most of you won't have that, but the Bennington one will. And again, that space and rent, if it's donated, you're going to have it all under match. It doesn't mean that you don't put it. It's still there. It's, and sometimes it's part donated, and I mean, part you pay part, and someone's giving you a great bargain. So maybe you need office space plus program space. And maybe you found an organization that is going to donate you the office space in their building, as long as you pay rent for the program space. So it can go any way. It really depends upon the program, but this is what you need to talk about. And then indirect admin. And as I said, with some of your smaller programs, there's going to be very little indirect admin, but there may be some. Think about, is there somebody else who's doing billing, taxes, any kind of maintenance, that sort of thing. And then here's the total. And basically in each of these, each place where you put something, it's going to add up to 100%. So any questions before I put you off to work on this together? And I'm going to, again, quickly review the 4 projects. So we have the Vernon one, which is going to conduct the needed repairs, engage the community, and hold a townwide event, and possibly, I don't know where you've come down on this, research and share the historic value and role. Deb, you can tell your group how you feel about that. Number 2, this is a more complicated one, although as I recall, you're not hiring the staff yourself, you're contracting out for the staff. So that really makes a difference. But there are going to be plenty of other pieces to this one. And keep in mind, with something like this grant is clearly only going to pay for part of the whole program. So we're only talking in this budget about what this grant is going to pay for. Now, many budgets will ask, I mean, many funders will ask you, and you'll be saying that this is part of a larger project. And so there will be another page where they'll say, other sources of funding for other parts of this project, and you'll have to address that. But because we're looking at $30,000, I'm not doing that with you. And the West River Trail, this is clearly one where there's going to be quite a bit of contracted work. but there will also be some materials. Meaning, you know, equipment or supplies. And then the chairlift, this is, this should be a pretty simple one. And as I said, it's really only objective 1, 2, and 3, because you're going to log the chairlift after you get the grant. I left it in here, but I put a question mark. I think it's really going to be 1, 2, and 3. Are there any questions before I put you into your groups and you start to, and give you 30 minutes to work on the budget? And understanding again, 30 minutes is not what it takes to do a budget, but this is often the way we start. You know, me and the budget person and the program person would have a preliminary meeting once we've kind of mapped out what it is we're going to do, and say, okay, you know, how do we anticipate using these funds? And then we sort of go from there. So, oops, I didn't mean to do that. So, any questions?
I'm just wondering if you're going to be able to leave that slide up so that we can look at those categories. I didn't print off the slides in advance.
I am not facile enough to understand how I can share the screen while you're in your groups. So
Just jot them down quickly. Thank you.
yeah, let me give you a minute.
The attachment was in the email. If you have access, Lee, to the email, the actual PDF
Thank you.
attachment, and you could just open
That's right.
that and you can.
Okay, good. I'll
Oh,
do
that's
that.
a good point, Deb. Good point. That's kind of easy. Yeah. So, and I think most of your group, hopefully some have printed it out, but I'll give you a minute to look at it and just see if there's any questions. Any questions about match? Oh, and you know what? Why don't I just, well, you know, if it's $30,000, somebody who has a math brain, what is 20% match? Anybody?
Was 20% of 30,000.
Yeah.
6,000.
6,000. So as you approach this, I want you to approach it with coming up with at least 6,000 match. Okay.
Oh.
And I know you're not going to finish, but just keep that in mind. I want you to be thinking about where can we get match? Where are we going to, and again, that can be cash match. You know, you can decide, oh, that's okay. 6,000, we have that in our budget. We can afford that. But if not, is there somebody, you know, an expert who would provide the training that we need, if you need any training, or some of the materials we need, or whatever it is.
So does that mean you would be asking for 24K with a 6K match for a total of 30?
Oh, no, Deb, I'm glad that you said that. What I mean, you just straightened me out, and I've made this mistake before. Thank you. No, you're going to get a $30,000 grant, and on top of that, a $6,000 match. You're asking for 30,000. They're going to give you 30,000. And I want you to show that you can also above and beyond that match 20%. That's what I meant to say. But yeah, you get okay. Any other questions? That was a good one. All right, I'm going to stop recording and start breakout rooms. 30 minutes. Go.